All right. Hello. Let me just see. Oh. Hi, everyone. I think we are streaming to YouTube. We're streaming on Facebook as well. Right. Okay. I'm just going to make sure that we are live on the Facebook stream. And
somebody just said, yes, we are.
We are?
Yeah.
In Facebook?
That's what they said, yes, we are.
Okay, great. I don't seem to be getting the comments from Facebook.
I'm getting them on the private chat.
Okay. All right. Okay, good. So I don't think I could see Facebook comments, but okay. But it seems like we are streaming there. So let's get things going. Sorry for that little bit of technical stuff. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Book Week. So my name is Logan McKay, and I am the Book Week coordinator for SaskBooks, which is Saskatchewan's nonprofit creative industry association for book publishing in Saskatchewan. And thank you all for coming. We are honored to have Stephen Ross Smith here to read from his short fiction book, Glimmer, published by Radiant Press as part of our Book Week events. Now, before we get into that, I'd like to make a few acknowledgements. SaskBooks head office is located on Treaty 4 territory in Regina. And SaskBooks work spans the whole province, including lands covered by Treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10, including the traditional lands of the Nahiawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, Dene, and Métis people. And as part of our commitment to decolonization, we invite everyone to read the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action and to consider what actions we might take to dismantle colonialism. We'd like everyone to write in the comments the traditional land that they're viewing from. We have a link that I can put in the chat, or we can put in the chat, and that'll tell you all. You can go there and see where you are viewing from. Let's see. Okay. There they are. We would also like to acknowledge and thank our funders. The Department of Canadian Heritage via the Canada Book Fund, Young Canada Works, Building Careers in Heritage, Creative Saskatchewan, and the Canada Council for the Arts, without whose support Book Week would not be possible. We would also like to thank Radiant Press, the publisher of Glimmer, for helping make Stephen's book and for helping us have him here on tonight. So thank you. And a little bit of info about Stephen. Stephen Ross Smith has published poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. He is known for his 7-book poetic exploration, Fluttertongue. He's also an arts journalist specializing in literary and visual arts. Over many decades, he's been effective too as a literary activist on behalf of writers, speaking, teaching, organizing, blogging, editing, and presenting. He has lived and written in Toronto, Saskatoon, Banff, Winnipeg, on Galiano Island. Is that pronounced right? Galiano, and now in Victoria. 2 chapbooks featuring his work were recently published with Saskatoon's Jack Pine Press. Table for Four was created with Winnipeggers Ted Landrum, Jennifer Still, and Colin Smith in 2020. And Stephen's final book in the Fluttertongue series, Coda, Fluttertongue 7, appeared in 2021, designed by Brian Cashier. Smith served as Banff Poet Laureate 2019 to 2021. He was also the founding director of Sage Hill Writing Experience and director of literary arts at the Banff Center. Glimmer, Short Fictions with Radiant Press, is his 14th book. All right. And with that, I hand it over to you, Stephen.
Okay. Thanks very much, Logan. And thanks to all of you who have tuned in. And of course, thank you to Glimmer. Yeah, thank you to Glimmer. Thank you to Radiant Press for publishing this book. I'm so happy with the results, and I'm really pleased to be able to read it to you here today. The challenge with the collection of short fictions, because all in all, there are 25 pieces in here, some longer, some shorter. So the trick when doing a reading is you think, okay, well, what should I read? And because each story is a work unto itself, it didn't seem to me that reading one story in entirety would be good representation. So I've tried to pick some samples, and I'll speak a little bit about the book as I go through. But and some of the pieces are longer, some shorter. I'm not going to read an entire section from the longer ones, but I'm going to give you a bit of a sample. It's like a tasting event. So I'd like to start with this story, Reason to Believe. And I will just say that there's a lot of music in these stories. The longer stories all have references to music in them, specific pieces of music, even sometimes instruments and such. And this one is one of those, which is why I thought I'd choose it. And this is a relatively straightforward narrative. I'm going to read 2 sections from this, from Reason to Believe. Lucky, his suitcase on the bed, is rifling through his dresser drawer and throwing underwear and t-shirts into his suitcase. The radio's playing, slightly off frequency, Hey Jude, pushing through the fuzzy sound. I had a strange dream, Krupa. There was a dog in it. He was old and brown, not an energetic puppy like you. You're black and white, eh? Not brown. Do you know that? The dog was lost in the city, and he had my drumsticks in his mouth. I was looking for him, but he was always somewhere else. Lucky talking over the radio. That dream had me tossing and turning all night. He pats Krupa on the head, snaps the suitcase closed, lifts it, and starts for the stairs. Krupa follows as Lucky sings along with the radio. When he belts the line, take a sad song, Krupa begins to howl. Tara, just home from the all-night shift at the hospital, stumbles into the Krupa Lucky duet and almost trips over the jumble inside the front door. Krupa runs toward her. Lucky, his voice trailing off, stands by the archway to the dining room, black suitcase in one hand, a box of Milkbone in the other. Tara, I'm heading out, Lucky says. Tara closes the door and slips off her plum-colored topcoat. You look good, says Lucky. Tara laughs, a half laugh. You always say that on your way out the door. Tara eyes the suitcase. Another road trip with the band? No band, just me solo. I'm going to L.A. Solo? L.A.? Huh, that's big news. Yep, I've got to make a change. Tara throws her coat over the back of the sofa. Lucky sets the suitcase down. I've got a connection, a referral. A guy heard me play last week at the Legion, told his bro-in-law agent in L.A., who called me. Wow. She pushes a loose wisp of her dark hair over her left ear. Any reason you didn't mention it to me before? Or like, call me at work? Her face flushes red. Wow is right. He phoned out of the blue last night after you went to work. He wants to see me as soon as I can get my ass out there, so I'm going. His words accelerate. Look at me. Been playing drums around Lethbridge over 10 years now for effing dribs. I'm getting pudgy gigging in gymnasiums, 33-year-old playing for peanuts, going nowhere drummer. That's a bit harsh, Lucky, she says. That's the reality. It's now or never. Now or never, your mantra the whole year since you moved in. You sure this LA gig is legitimate? There must be 5,000 drummers in LA. 5,001 very soon. The Milkbone box rattles as Lucky steps toward her. If it goes well, I'll stay a while. Tara steps back. Stay a while? Like permanently? If there's work, if I can get a card, what about me and Krupa? Krupa looks toward Lucky with his wide gray eyes and lolling tongue. You've got a job, and they might not let Krupa cross the border. He'll be more content, more stable here. I don't know what my circumstances will be. He'll be alone for a big chunk of the day, and that's not good for him. Just for a while. Then I'll make arrangements. Here, I bought a box of treats. Give him one for me once in a while. Lucky reaches into the box. Krupa perks his ears. What are you leaving for me? Tara's eyes, wide, moist, stare straight at Lucky. Well, yeah, I'm not, you know how I've said, like, I just got to do it. I'm too unhappy for you and my music. I need to drum with some real pros, with some fire. I need to shape up my chops. I need a challenge, some success. I'm not sure what that means for us, but Tara looks away from Lucky. You and me with your drum set in between, not to mention your dog. She looks down at the floor, then around the living room. What about the rest of your stuff? Her name stops in his throat. I'm sorry. I'll take care of. I need to do this. I thought you'd understand. He takes another step toward her to make some parting gesture. Tara brushes past and walks toward the kitchen, right out the back porch, the door slamming behind her. Lucky calls, his voice raised toward the closed door. I'll be in touch. You should do whatever you need to do. I'll leave some money and we'll send more for Krupa's food when I get gigging. He swivels, stuck to his spot. To back door, to Krupa, to front door, to the back door again, its curtains still twitching from the slam. Then he calls out, I'm sorry. I'm going by the studio, but I'll leave the extra key here. Bye, Tara. He pulls out a Milkbone, tosses it to Krupa's eager mouth. See ya, boy. Remember the dog dream. don't get lost. So that's the opening to that story. And it's a bit of a road story. Lucky goes on the road, heading for LA. He gets to Butte, where something maybe life-changing, something interesting happens. He's in a casino in Butte after his car is broken down. Ladies and gentlemen, we're thrilled to invite a special guest to the stage right now. The band flourishes a short crescendo. All the way from Chicago, the one and only Buddy Guy. Lucky turns quickly on his stool and almost falls off. Can't be. But sure enough, there he is, ambling onto the stage. Sunglasses, cocoa-colored fedora, the band easing into Hoodoo Man blues. Buddy Guy in a casual voice saying how glad he is to stop by and play with some old pals. Lucky scans the room and tries to comprehend. The band amps up and Buddy slings his guitar from his shoulder, slides a metal bar over the strings up the neck, and the instrument begins to moan. Lucky's body goes one way and his head another, his body pulsing with the beat and Buddy's amazing guitar, head scrambling to make sense of Buddy Guy right here, right in front of him, in the Flying J Casino in Butte, Montana. I must be hallucinating, he thinks. Tara'd never believe this, says Lucky, half to the air and half to Stace. A guitar flourish snaps Lucky's attention back to the stage. Patrons stream toward the dance floor, drawn by the pulsing beat, the wailing guitar. The room's energy lifts and flows. The slots, the felted tables abandoned. Heads bob, knees bounce, dancers wave their arms and spin. People nod and smile at each other through the rhythms of the songs and a beat that keeps driving. The joint jumping with the primal joy that intense, energetic music generates. Sweet Home Chicago belts into the room. Lucky turns to Stace, sitting steady with a big grin on his face, his meaty hand bouncing on the bar. Lucky nods and turns back as Garrett's drum snaps the song to a slashing close. Buddy Guy, let's hear it, shouts Garrett into the microphone. Hoots and applause. Buddy slings his guitar back behind his arm, his hand gripping the neck by his side, and he steps from the stage into the audience, weaves through the crowd and tables, brushing and shaking hands as he moves toward the bar. He reaches Stace, gives him a cool low five. Great show, Buddy, I owe you now, says Stace. No, brother, Buddy says, slow and easy, grasping his hand. We're well even, Stace, my man. Easy stop en route. My pure pleasure. Lucky, speechless, leaps off his stool and offers his hand. Buddy shakes it, smiles, and turns away. Rockin', thanks, says Lucky, finally finding words, said to Buddy's back as he moves to the door. The G-tones are playing again, but to Lucky their sound seems distant. He turns to them, and then, as if awakening from a reverie, he rushes toward the exit, in time to see Buddy Guy step into a touring bus, the door closing behind him. Lucky waves spontaneously as the bus signals and merges onto the roadway, pulling something in Lucky along with it, something aching in him. The moment, so great, so powerfully musical, so brief, so gone. Lucky yanks out his phone and auto dials Tara. No answer. He stares a long time at the bus's receding taillights as they diminish down the highway and fade into the night. Back on his bar stool, Lucky orders another lager. I can't believe it. Buddy Guy here playing with the G-tones in Butte, Montana. That was glorious. Believe it, man. You saw, you heard, you shook his hand. Reason to believe, says Stace. And that's a sample from the beginning and then kind of somewhere near the middle of that story, which does continue on with some things happening to Lucky. But of course, if you want to know what happens to Lucky, you have to find the book. So there's another aspect to this book. There's 13 pieces that I call short novels. And they were a response to something I read, a quote from Italo Calvino, the Italian writer. And he said, "I would like to edit a collection of tales consisting of one sentence only, or even a single line." And the challenge interested me. And so I've written 50, what I call short novels for people on the go. 13 of them are included here. And this is one of them. So this is one sentence long. It's called The Pianist. Adam had developed tendonitis in his forearms from playing the piano without warming up his fingers and wrists, and by playing too long and holding his arms in the wrong position, which caused the muscles to activate inappropriately until finally the strain became evident in the form of pain that radiated from his wrists to his elbows and prevented him from playing even for a short time. So he began to feel distressed, and he did not want to fall behind the others in his class, which caused another kind of pain, or if not pain, then stress and anxiety that became visceral. So he resorted to a mental practice, imagining his fingers playing on the keys, and he found he could do this for long periods, which helped him keep up. And meanwhile, he was icing his arms and alternately warming them with a heating pad, and also consulting a physiotherapist to learn exercises for his muscles, exercises which he did diligently. And as a result, the discomfort slowly lessened, and he was able to return to playing just minutes at first, then up to 10 minutes, then 20, then more, which gradually eased his stress and distress until he was finally fluid again and playing for an hour or more at a stretch, thus enabling him to prepare for the duet he was scheduled to perform with his friend Milo, the guitarist, and to return to playing electronic keyboard with his newly formed rock band. And so life seemed wonderful until he read of a soldier who had lost both of his arms in an explosion in Syria, and Adam felt a new kind of anguish born of compassion, and he felt gratitude in his understanding that despite setbacks, he was most fortunate in a world where others suffered. And so he decided to play with new dedication and to devote many of his performances to the injured and underprivileged, realizing that this was all he could do to make a contribution, and that he could not alter circumstances for those who suffered, but he might lift their spirits, if even for a few minutes. And he tried to remember this every time he encountered a passage that seemed too difficult to learn, and thinking, no matter how hard it is, I have it easy. And so pressed on with the determination that he had learned from seeing the soldier struggle, which caused him to look at his own fingers and arms as instruments that he shared not just with the piano, but also with the soldier without arms. And so Adam's arms often felt that they were guided by some other force, by something he could not comprehend, just as he could not explain how the technicalities of the score, the black notes in the staff on the paper, made him move his fingers and body in particular ways to create sounds. That is to say, the music he played, which contained mysteries that could cause people to weep or feel exhilaration and transport them onto other planes of perception, as he too himself was transported beyond the physical. So that's the story of The Pianist in one sentence and a few breaths. The stories in here vary. Some are collage-like, some are relatively straight-ahead narratives. I've tried to develop character and emotion, but I have a kind of a self-undermining edge, and I also like to muck around a bit with the form of the story. And some of the stories are surrealistic. Some are a bit meta. Hope you understand meta. Metafiction, fiction playing within itself, I guess you might say. And so this, I guess, might be a bit of surrealist meta, perhaps. So I'm going to read the introduction to a story. Yes, that's right. To a story called Bomber. He started out complaining and then moved to guerrilla tactics, correcting the errors wherever he found them. It had become his obsession since seeing over and over that signs and other texts represented the plural by putting an incorrect apostrophe before the pluralizing S. Lucky Sevens, haircuts by Austin, even Carl's Jr. charbroiled burgers, a complex, mystifying misuse. Did Junior belong to Carl? Or were the burgers adolescent and owned? Or was the charbroiling done by a more minimal method? As well, there were erroneous absences and presences of apostrophes, even two at once in the local newspaper story about a robbery. Mrs. McDonald's snatched handbag, its wallet containing $400, and a variety of other abuses. You have to read the text to see where the misplaced apostrophes are. He carried pens, markers, and 2 cans of aerosol paint, white and black, the white to erase, the black to place the apostrophe correctly, or the reverse if need be. With his aerosol paints, he could be precise because each can could be set with a narrow tube inserted in the nozzle to direct the spray with fine accuracy. Or he could use the full spray for chunkier corrections. His other tool was his computer, where he would rail on social media against apostrophe errors he'd find on websites or in emails. Precision, his guiding principle, even in the part of his hair. Parting hair had fallen out of fashion, but was a fashion he maintained. Left side, arrow straight. Below the part, his dark hair slicked back, and above, the hair combed straight across his skull, but with a slight curve toward his forehead. This gave him a kind of a 1920s look, or at least that's the number he thought of when grooming and refining the look. The 20s, he'd say. Even that doesn't have the same meaning anymore. Maybe it's the 50s I'm thinking of, or after the wars, he said. The wars? There is no after. They continue. He called his war the art of apostrophe bombing. That's what he'd write on his occupation. That's what he'd write as his occupation anytime he had to fill out an official form. Apostrophe bomber. Most often, no one would even read it, but sometimes a clerk, suddenly nervous, did ask what that meant. Copy editing, he'd reply, to avoid elaboration. That usually ended the conversation, both terms being obscure to most. But he found this more fun than saying carpenter's helper. He was working at the new housing development being scraped out of the farmland past the edge of the city, where the fertile land sprouted a new stucco and asphalt paradise. There he schlepped fiberboard, buckets of screws, rolls of poly sheathing, whatever he was ordered to do. His coveralls were clean at the start of each day, as crisp as the part of his hair. On his way to the site every day on the crew bus, he passed beneath the sign hanging from the overpass that announced the development, Rolling Meadows Estate. Each time, as soon as the sign came into view, and even though he argued with himself about the ambivalence, and about his ambivalence, about whether meadows could possess estates, he knew it was wrong, and his shoulders tensed, and his nape shivered. That fucking apostrophe. He raised the error with his boss, who shrugged and said, "I'll report it." It had not changed. Tonight, he stayed in the tool trailer, cleaning up, but really waiting for the cover of darkness. Now, under the crescent moon and stars, he walks up the roadway onto the bridge above the sign, ready to make the correction. The sign hangs vertically on the bridge face below the concrete curb and the safety railing. The task requires him to dangle off the bridge railing, one hand on a post and the other operating his spray can, just one, the white, for erasure. All that is required for this correction, while hanging at an angle, mostly upside down. It's a stretch. He's met such challenges before. As he anchors his feet against the concrete edge, leans out and down, he feels his hair lifting, or should we say, dropping away from his forehead. He'd combed it after taking off his hard hat at the end of the workday, close to his skull and in his preferred style. The hairs are dropping now due to his upside down position. The lifting, dropping hair and the resulting lightness and the slight pull on his scalp is the momentary sensation that draws his attention, distracts him, and for an instant makes him forget his task. So his hand slips, and he plunges headfirst, dropping into a 6-meter void between him and the asphalt below. The author is tempted to end the story here in a dramatic moment with a defeat in the apostrophe war, the protagonist falling, and the reader hung in suspense. By the way, you'll notice now it was not the bomber, but the author who inserted the earlier comment, the wars, there is no after, they continue. Meanwhile, the descent will carry on, but at the author's direction, in slow motion. The cool night air buffets the bomber's skin, a sensation created not by a breeze, for the night is calm, but by his descent through that air. His right hand still clutches the paint can, holds it slightly outstretched above his head as it had been when he was preparing to make the correction, while actually, because of his inverted position, it is more accurate to say below his head. The other hand and arm extend like a wing and begin to move too in front of his head as if to push the ground away when he gets there. His eyes, now focused on the asphalt below, turn its surface into a lake of black flecks, 10,000 apostrophes rippling in his view. If this were a James Bond movie, there would be a fast convertible car driven by a beautiful woman, friend or enemy, her hair darker than the night and flowing in the wind, this woman racing toward the underpass with perfect timing. But this is a nameless apostrophe bomber movie story, and so far has no other characters introduced. Well, his boss was mentioned, but only briefly. I should have said earlier that his name was Jules. Would that have made a difference? Jules? Apostrophe bomber? He's fallen about 2.5 meters now, and his body is tumbling somewhat, like a diver, all the muscles shifting into an awkward roll. The aerosol can has come loose from his grip and descends at an angle slightly away from his body, flipping, also in slow motion, end over end, its nozzle jammed and spraying an arcing trail of white. Jules is 40. He's been alone for some time since his girlfriend left him. I never really understood her anyway, he would say to himself on evenings alone in front of the television or computer screen. Yet he felt lonely those nights. He'd also say, whatever. And so his bombings took on more importance and frequency. She, Miranda, had been, however, extremely patient and is quite lovely, even with, or perhaps because of, her horn-rimmed glasses and her shapely treadmill-worked legs. But she had her limits. Jules, I have my limits, she would say. I'm only human. But Jules, who had no limits to his obsessions, would reply, nonetheless, we must take arms against a sea of troubles. He thought he was entertaining and that his issues were of great significance, and Miranda was the only one to whom he could reveal his bombing escapades. It made him feel close to her. So, too, the fact that they'd met in a continuing ed Wednesday evening Shakespeare tutorial. He'd list for her all the errors he'd seen and say, "It's a war of apostrophic proportions." Sometimes she'd laugh and say, "Okay, Jules." But other times she'd cry in exasperation. And Jules, uncomfortable with her emotional displays, would head out into the night. He sees her face in front of him now, her glinty brown eyes through the horn rims, her smiling lips, and he realizes her kindness. And he slips right through those eyes toward the blackness. I'm going to be my own apostrophe, he thinks, as the pavement approaches to welcome him. So we'll leave Jules there kind of in suspended animation, suspended. And again, to find out what happens to Jules, you know what you have to do. The book is called Glimmer. You can get it from Radiant Press or your favorite indie local bookstore. In Saskatchewan, in Saskatoon, perhaps McNally Robinson. In Victoria, maybe Monroe's and Russell Books. I'm not getting paid for commercial announcements. Okay, to keep this moving and to leave some time for questions and comments, if there are some. A short one-sentencer here called The Pitch. Or even a single line, he said tantalizingly, daring the creator to come up with a solution with words which may or may not be possible, even though a painter, specifically Picasso, could make a recognizable shape from a single line. So why couldn't a writer? But how long is a single line, and what would it need to encompass, since after all, visual art is another matter, as a pencil or brush can go anywhere without interruption, without lifting from the surface, while words are full of spaces and quirks and meaning. But what is meaning, and what is a story or tale? And so the writer has arguably a more complicated structure to deal with. So one way she or he might meet this challenge is by rolling on endlessly and tangentially to create a narrative that will cohere or not and have suspense or momentum or connection. But is that happening here, where there seems to be just a pile of words poured out by a writer who is, in a sense, cheating because there are no epic struggles, no tender moments, well, one or two, but no real tales the way one likes to think of these, where some kind of human predicament or lesson is demonstrated in a particular time and place, which may transport the reader or in some cases cause him or her simply to give up and refuse to read further, which is your prerogative, but does not seem to have happened here as you are reading this. And there's not far to go now. So why not continue? Because two, or is it three, characters already seen above may reappear shortly, and one presumes that something will be revealed. The final piece that I'll read is the opening to a story called In Paris, a Fountain. And I guess it's, well, let's just say it plays with time. In Paris, a Fountain. It has been a while since Sam Beckett has been able to travel, what with the wars, the viruses, his boils, and bad teeth. Finally, though, here he is in Saskatoon. It might have been the Irish-sounding oon that had first caught his attention. The city's name rolled naturally off his tongue. And now there is his play's current production. However, though he'd not been public about it, what took him and holds him now is love. Love for Evie May. Sam, or Andrew, as he'd occasionally identify himself when he felt a pseudonym necessary, had had relationships, several, magnetic, full of attract-repel dynamics. Have I truly loved top to bottom, soul to soul? He once asked himself. He knew the answer. He did not know love as such in its most elemental form. Let's just say that he didn't have the best love modeling as a child. Not a new story. Want, not want, as one of his characters said. Sam thought love involved self-control and resistance. In all his romances, he hovered above elemental love. Yes, I know, I've now used that term, elemental, twice, though Sam would not think of it that way, not use that word. He was wary with words, careful, mistrusting their inaccuracy, abstraction. He searched for the most authentic, distilled phrases. Love, he'd said, it's a word, a story, a pretend. But you see, I'm outside his story and his words, so can watch and describe circumstances in a way that he could not, despite his skills at parsing and writing of the human condition. And who, after all, is totally self-aware. Waiting for Godot is soon to run at Persepolis Theatre, and Mr. Beckett, or sometimes Mr. B, as the director Anatole refers to him, is attending every rehearsal and demanding that the actors adhere to his interpretations and not embellish or improvise. He had been controlled in his childhood by his mother May's fiery tirades and manipulations at what she called his sloth, her disappointment in him. As an antidote, in his art, he exercises cool control with pairings and boundaries. He loves his work, and there he strives for perfection, but often feels at the same time his failures. For Sam, as in art, as in love. Now you might say, wait, Sam Beckett died in 1989. I cannot disagree, nor can I satisfactorily explain his appearance in Saskatoon during a pandemic, but I simply offer this story as I know it. Precautions were taken, and necessary travel permissions were acquired. No, lento, lento. Raise your head more slowly, says Mr. B, the tone stern through his mask, bony hand pressing his furrowed forehead. Estragon, rather the actor playing Estragon, lowers his head again. For the length of one silent, deep breath, adds Mr. B. And so rehearsals went. Underneath Sam's sternness was the irritation at the fact that his production would play on an ungodly, distancing computer online platform that has taken over the world as a presentation forum. But on this Zoom, he'd said to Anatole, will the play be experienced? I think it will just be seen, not felt. How can any expression pass through this lifeless, flat screen, this mask? Well, I ask you, have we transcended the flat screen today? Only you know. So that's what I'm going to read from the book. Again, this story goes on quite a bit longer, and you might call it a love story. And it's certainly my love story to Samuel Beckett in a way, who was a big influence on me as a young reader and writer. Anyway, over to you, Logan. Is your audio on, Logan?
My bad. Thank you, Stephen. That was great. I enjoy that you picked stories that added that meta element to the stream itself that we were doing.
Yeah.
On this Zoom, the flat screen. Well, the emotions come through the flat screen. That was great. Well, what does our audience think? We can't hear you, Logan. Yeah, sorry about that. But I think everyone can hear me now. So yeah, I don't seem to have Facebook comments coming through StreamYard, but I can go to Facebook and see them. So if anyone in the chat has any comments for Stephen, please feel free to post them in there. Emily asks, what made you want to incorporate other art mediums like music and visual art into the passages you read? Do they continue throughout the book?
Yes, there's a lot of music, some references to visual art and theater, as you heard there. I guess it's because that's my world. I suppose in many ways I live in the arts. I got a thing from a couple of decals from the Saskatchewan Arts Alliance that said, "Oh, the arts live here," and I have one on my card that says "Powered by the Arts," and I guess that's where I live. And it comes into, even though I don't necessarily write directly from my own experience. Your experience is what you live, and I guess that's how it gets in. The music is a huge part of I don't spend a day that I'm not listening to music, truly. Hours some days, and a couple of the early stories began to have music in them, and then I thought, yeah, that's interesting, and so at the end of the book there's a playlist. So you know how at the end of a film you'll see all the music credits. Well, I have music credits at the end of my book, and there's I don't know 13, 15, 20 pieces of music credit at the end of the book. So yes, those are important forms to me, important forms of communication. So I was really kind of pleased to be able to include them in the stories.
That makes me want to get the book and see what this Glimmer playlist is like.
Yeah, yeah. There's even some opera. So.
Oh wow. We have a couple questions from Facebook. Andrea asks, which story was the most difficult to write?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think probably, two of them. There were two of them that I can think of right now. I must say, I had great help from a couple of readers along the way, and from my editor, Dave Margoshes, to fine tune and to sometimes give me a bit of confidence about a story that I had doubts about. But probably the hardest ones were although it came to me, I was going to say In Paris, a Fountain, in a way was a hard story to write, how to incorporate the various threads that are meta and non-meta and time leaping. And that was the last story that I wrote. So that one was a challenge. I think the other one was, there's a story called Arnie's Workshop. It's about a very messy guy who is a fine carpenter, crafting carpenter. And it was hard to get that one, to feel like I was getting it right. And I mean, with some of these stories, you never know if you've got it right. But that one, I think I felt it got right enough that I could publish it. But I'm just looking through the table of contents here to remember. No story comes easily. All of these stories started about 8 years ago. The first story was, if not more, at least 8 years ago. And they've all been through, a revising and editing process all along the way. So I think to get a story really well tuned never comes easy. It's work, the ideas sometimes come easier. The starting point sometimes comes easier, sometimes not. You have to search for it. But yeah, so they're all hard to write, or hard to polish up.
Interesting. I think Andrea also asks, what books are you currently reading?
Oh, well, that's interesting. Okay, I'll have to try and remember, because I tend to read like 5 books at a time. Well, I'm reading a couple by Saskatchewan writers right now. I'm reading Catastrophe Theories, which is Mary Lou Rowley's poetry collection. I'm reading Sarah N's book, and the title is just out of my mind right now, but it's her first book. Sarah was in Saskatchewan for a while, in Saskatoon. She's now back in Winnipeg. I'm reading Tim Lilburn's Harmonia Mundi, which, Tim is an ex-Saskatoon writer, Saskatchewan writer, still with strong ties to Saskatchewan. New book published by an Irish press. I'm reading Carl Jurgens, The Razor's Edge. Carl is a writer from Windsor who was the editor of Rampike magazine. I'm reading his collection of fictions called The Razor's Edge. And I might I'm reading Dave Carpenter's delightful book, There Was Never a Rattlesnake I Met. What is it? I've never met a rattlesnake I didn't like. I'm reading that book as well. And then always, falling back on some of my heroes who I just will pick up sometimes and glance through, like Paul Celan, B.P. Nichol, Daphne Marlett. I mean, there's a whole slew. But right now, the first books I mentioned are the main ones that I'm reading right now whose titles I can recall more or less. What's Sarah N's book title? The World is Only Sky. Just a minute. Right. The World is Mostly Sky. I want to get that right, eh? So that's what I'm reading. I read poetry, fiction. I read some nonfiction.
Yeah. And Jane asks, what is the significance of the little flies on your shirt?
Oh, they're just, I'm living with a lot of insects. No, they're actually puffins. They're puffins. The significance is something that was decided by, I think, I think it's a Gap shirt. Why puffins? I don't know. I should write a story about puffins, I guess.
Oh, that's the opposite coast, isn't it?
It's a different coast. Yeah, for sure.
Well, it might give you an excuse to go across country again.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Are there any more questions anyone has in the chat for Stephen before we wrap up?
While you're searching there, I would like to really thank Radiant Press. I know the small press world, or the independent press world is a better term. And I know the dedication that people who operate these independent presses, I know the dedication that they have, small staff and huge work. I know what's involved in publishing books. I was involved publishing books at the Banff Center. And so I really do want to thank the team at Radiant, Deborah and John and others for the work in bringing my book to life and getting it into the world. And so my hat is off. I was going to wear a hat today, but I didn't. But anyway, my hat is off to Radiant Press. Thank you. And I guess if there's no questions, I can also just thank the sponsors of this event and National Book Week and and Logan, who's kind of steered me along from the initial invitation. I really appreciate that. And it's great to have an opportunity to present your work on this ungodly platform, as Samuel Beckett has said. And thanks to everybody who tuned in.
Yeah, thank you all. Pam Buston says, great to be here with you. Stephen, thank you for a fun reading.
Oh, Pam, Pam, it's been too long since I've seen you, and your jubilant, happy persona. And congratulations, by the way, on your new posting. It's going to bring you back to Saskatchewan. And I'm sorry I'm not going to be in the province when you're there, although maybe I will be. Who knows? Maybe we'll get a chance to raise a glass. Hi, Manson.
Well, I agree with Pam. That was a very fun reading. I enjoyed it a lot. And thank you, Stephen, for your thank yous as well. I mean, small presses and independent presses are what make SaskBooks, and they are the backbone of what we do and everything. And they help make Book Week. So yeah, thank you, Radiant. Thank you, all our funders, Creative Saskatchewan, Department of Canadian Heritage, Canada Council of the Arts. And yeah, thank everyone for joining us and tuning in. And thank you, Stephen. That was excellent.
Read on.
All right. I think with that, we come to a close. We do have another event happening tonight. For anyone who is interested, we have Wes Olson reading The Ecological Buffalo at 7 p.m. And that's published by the University of Regina Press. Tomorrow night at 5 o'clock CST, we have Marian Mutala cooking borscht from her new cookbook, Baba Sophie's Ukrainian Cookbook, which I had the pleasure to be part of, and it is very tasty. And tomorrow at 7 CST, we will have Belinda Betker reading her book Phases, which has been republished by Shadowpot Press. So yeah. And thanks again for coming, everyone. And thank you, Stephen. Goodbye.
Bye.